Hi, guys. Welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, a podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hey, little helpers. Today I'm going to be talking about a really interesting topic, which is manipulation. And especially I'm going to talk about manipulation when it comes to your relationships with people that you're closest to, like a partner, a child, a parent, a sibling, whatever, even a boss, who might have mental health issues. And mostly I talk about borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, but also depression, anxiety, OCD, trauma. So I've just been hearing a lot more, especially when people are really, really frustrated and at the height of like, I don't feel like I have any control or freedom over this relationship. I end up doing things that I don't want to. I said yes to giving money or support in ways that I really didn't. I said yes to having sex. I said yes to giving something or doing something for this person, and I didn't want to. And I feel like I didn't have a choice and I had to do something, or I did do something, but I felt manipulated. So that's what I'm hearing a lot, where manipulation comes up, and maybe think about like, what is manipulation? Uh how do we understand it? What is the definition, and how does it actually show up in relationships with people with borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, or any kind of mental health issues? But I'm focusing on those because that's where I'm hearing a lot. It's interesting because with borderline, when I hear people talk about their relationships with people with BPD, they they only really say that they feel manipulated when they're at that low, when they're really frustrated, when they're really overwhelmed and quite sad about their loved one with BPD. But with narcissistic abuse, it's like they're evil, they're doing this tactic, and I got to get out. So so it's a little bit more this feeling of like the narcissist is a bad guy who manipulates, whereas loved ones of people with BPD, they feel manipulated in those relationships, but there's not a clear perception of someone with BPD as like an evil person. Is manipulation a sign of someone who is evil? Is it bad? Is it inherently evil, or is it just used for evil? Before I dive into that whole topic, I do want to say that if you are in a relationship with someone that you love who has borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder, or just struggles with emotions, and you're feeling manipulated, or vice versa, like you're feeling like I I don't feel free, and I don't feel in control, and I don't feel respected, and I feel overwhelmed by this relationship, then check out Cool of Mind. That is the program where I help people like you really ground themselves in themselves again. So I teach skills about how to set boundaries, how to pay attention to when you feel manipulated, your own feelings, and assert yourself, and still stay connected and loving to that person, assuming that that's what you want. So check it out, coolamind.com, KULAMIND.com, or you can just look in the show notes because I'll have the link there. And you can just book a call with me and talk to me about it, and we can figure out if you're the right fit, and vice versa. So check out Cool Mind. If hearing these topics, you're like, oh yeah, I definitely feel manipulated, or there's a problem with manipulation in my relationship. So first, let's start with, what is manipulation? That's actually kind of a hard question to answer, because when I dug into the research, there's just not very good definitions of manipulation. Because a lot of things can be considered manipulative, right? So in the research, manipulation is defined as this broad term for behavior that shapes another person's thoughts, feelings, decisions, or actions by exploiting their vulnerability. Other tactics under this umbrella are distorting reality, limiting autonomy, making someone feel fear or guilt, dependency, or self-doubt, right? So it's really like making someone do something um, in a shitty way, so to speak. But as you can tell, that is pretty broad, right? There isn't a lot of research on like manipulation, but there is a lot of research on the different types, like coercive control, which is getting power of intimidating someone into doing what you want, psychological control, isolation, right? Um, keeping someone alone, and also any kind of like using their emotions. So at first I was like, oh my God, this is so broad. What is a manipulation? Is it really that bad? Or is it something um that only evil people do? And I really like there's one definition um that I saw that I really liked by Alexander Fisher, and he called it the pleasurable ends model of manipulation. And in this definition, manipulation is defined as a form of influencing someone else, a way of influencing someone else, where the manipulator tries to affect the emotions of another person, um, and really points them to a decision that they can perceive as pleasurable or not pleasurable. So it's really like someone is using another person's emotions to steer them to a decision by making some decisions look unpleasant and the one that they want as pleasant. It's like, oh, okay. So it's a lot more of like a decision making tactic, like influencing how someone makes decisions. And also in this definition, there is this element of that the manipulator tends to have more power, tends to have more resources, or the other person is weaker, more vulnerable, doesn't have as much resources. So there is kind of like a power difference, which might make it easier, but essentially it's someone making you feel something and making you decide based on that emotion. The key part of that, like even as I'm talking about it, I'm like, that's everything, right? That's like we do this all the time. We make people feel stuff so they do something, right? Anyone who is in marketing or sales, you make one option seem really positive, right? Really amazing. You make my commercials might get at your emotions in order for you to take an action, right? And or even just making a speech or pitching or talking to someone about your feelings, right? Like we are doing this all the time. I talk about this all the time where emotions are a form of communication. So is that really bad to have someone make a decision based on their feelings, like appealing to their emotional side to make them make a decision or to like influence them into making a decision? Not inherently, right? But what we feel really uncomfortable with is the idea that that manipulator is making someone make a decision that they normally wouldn't be they don't have awareness of, or they wouldn't be willing to do, right? So it kind of feels sneaky, right? It's not just I'm making you feel something and I tell you a story and then you just feel inspired to do something uh based on your rational decision making, but like I'm almost like making you do something based on your emotion, based on of influencing your emotion that bypasses your rational mind, that makes you decide something that you normally wouldn't. It speaks to how much we really care about autonomy and rational decision making, right? I mean, we're making emotional decisions all the time. We think it's rational. I mean, I actually spent like so many years um, in the world of judgment and decision making research. So it's really funny to actually come to this research from that background because I'm like, Oh my God. I mean, we know that we make emotional decisions all the time. Most of our decisions are emotional, right? And we just rationalize it. There's a lot of research showing we make a gut decision and based on an emotion, and then we rationalize it later and be like, oh, I chose that because blah blah blah, but really it was because it made us feel something. And then also there's a lot of decisions we make unconsciously, like we don't sit down and think about and go, okay, let's weigh the pros and cons, and like, is this, but sometimes we make decisions without even thinking, impulsively or unconsciously. So I'm like, is all decision making, is all social decision making manipulative in some way? But if we really still, we see manipulation as negative because there's this feeling of taking away someone's agency, right? Like going around something that they think or they'll want for themselves from a wise mind or rational standpoint, and getting to something that's like more primal and using that to guide their actions and decisions instead of like their conscious self. Right. So we really love that. We really love the idea that I made the decision because I am in control of my thoughts and I've really thought it through. And if someone made me make a decision that wasn't from my thoughts, my brain, then it doesn't feel good. It feels like someone took something away from me. It feels like violating, right? So that's where this manipulation gets this kind of, I don't know, bad rap. The actual manipulation is interesting. The word manipulation, manipulate, comes from it was originally used to describe like, I'm going to move someone. I'm using taking my hand, manipulate, like how we say this when we talk about like chiropractors stuff. They manipulate your body, like uh, people who move your body around, taking your hands and actually moving someone to do something, right? That's manipulation. So eventually manipulation, the definition of that word is like skillfully uh moving someone into a certain direction. So you get the sense that, oh, it's like a puppeteer, right? Manipulation is like a puppeteer. You're actually being moved by someone, the manipulator. So I was reading this paper by Alexander Fisher, and there's some really cool examples that this author gives that is showing like manipulation can look all different ways. I really love that he brought up a one example, which is Tom Sawyer. If you've all read Tom Sawyer, and there's this famous scene where he's a little rascal, right? And he has to whitewash a fence. He has to paint a fence, and he doesn't like to do chores. So he acted like it was like the most fun thing ever. And his friends came up to him and was like, "Oh, I want to play." And he's like, "No, no, I'm doing this really awesome thing by whitewashing." And he made it seem so fun that all the kids joined in and did his whitewashing for him. Right. So that is, he used in this definition of pleasurable ends model manipulation, he used the feeling of excitement and curiosity and the fear of missing out, like a whole FOMO, to encourage these other kids to take over his job. Um, if you think about why is that so sneaky, why is that so bad, it might not have been a choice that kids would have made otherwise, right? He made the whitewashing seem like such a pleasurable option. It drew people into it, right? They were motivated to it. Other examples that are more commonplace is like guilt tripping, right? We hear this a lot with people with mental health issues, especially like narcissistic parents. I hear this a lot where they feel guilt tripped into things. Like kids of narcissistic parents say this all the time, where instead of the parent just asking, "Hey, can you call me? Can you, I miss you. I really want to talk to you more." They go, "Oh, fine. If you don't care about your mother, you don't have to call, but it's been so long. And I guess you're just negligent." Right. So so that is using guilt tripping, right? It's like making another person feel guilty for not taking an action. So it's boosting up the option of calling the mom is like a pleasurable one that will give some relief to, or at least is making the not calling more unpleasant, right? So it's kind of like it's influencing this person through their emotions, right? Because you might not have felt bad that you weren't calling them, but you feel bad that they're in so much pain over it and distress. So it makes you have to call them, right? So guilt tripping is another really common manipulation tactic. A really famous example that I'm really excited about because I recently saw it on stage and it was amazing. And I remember reading it in high school, but Othello, Shakespeare's Othello. So in Othello, you have Iago, who's played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who's so good. But and Othello was played by Denzel Washington. Both of them were incredible. But Iago is this, conniving, manipulative, sneaky villain. And what he did was I don't want to give it away. I mean, it's Shakespeare, it's everywhere. But he spends the whole show, the whole play, manipulating people, going to different people, befriending them, talking to them, and really using their vulnerability, things they care about, their weak points, their emotions, to get them to do things. And what he eventually does is convince Othello that his wife is cheating on him. And he's like really played puppeteer all along. He's really put the chess pieces, he moved people around. So it really looks like there's this affair going on, and Othello kills his wife. And so that is like, oh, that's clearly manipulation, right? That's like evil, right? You make someone do something bad against what they normally would have, for their own ends. So there is this level in manipulation of, I'm going to influence you based on your emotions. Using your emotions, I'm going to make certain options seem really good and certain options seem really bad, like killing his wife. I guess made him seem like a good option. And there's this idea that it's only for the manipulator's well-being, right? Like, I hate to say it, but I really think that if we're to take this definition of manipulation, right, just like using someone's feelings to inspire them to make a decision. Well, we have advertising, we have sales, we have storytelling, we have plays, we have entertainment, and also therapy. Like, we could look at it as like we're manipulating people into doing certain things. We're talking about their emotions, inspiring them to take certain actions. However, the difference is that therapists, they should, ask you what you want, right? What is the end that would benefit you? What are your goals here? Okay, I will influence you into doing that, being more connected to your family, or being more physically active or engaged with your life, right? Okay, I will help you with that goal instead of my goal, my selfish goal. So, but in some ways we use like manipulation to get people to do stuff. But the Othello example really highlights what manipulation, the way we think about it, really looks like, which is doing something for a selfish reason that is against someone else's well-being, or their values or their principles, or the way they would normally make decisions for themselves. Now, this part of the definition of manipulation totally surprised me. I assumed that manipulation was kind of like forcing someone to do something they don't want. That's what I thought manipulation was. But actually, a key part of at least this idea of manipulation is the victim has to make a choice or feel like they have a choice, right? Because if you are making them feel something that makes them go towards a more pleasurable option, maybe I like boosted up that option. Look at that burger. It's so great. You should totally buy my burger. Are you hungry? You go for it, right? There's an idea that person is making a decision, right? They are choosing something based on emotion, but it's this almost, I guess, an illusion, but there actually is this element of choice. There is autonomy there, but it's not the kind of autonomy we like, which is I think with my mind, and I make decisions based on that. So if you have a situation where someone doesn't have a choice, that's different. That's closer to coercive control. So coercive control is a really big sign of abuse. Um, I mean, all of this could be abusive, but this is a really intense form of abuse where the goal is to degrade, isolate, and deprive a person of their rights to security, dignity, and respect, which it basically is putting a person in a state of fear for their life and safety, and in order to control what they do, right? And so there's all different kinds of strategies and coercive control, which is um, like restricting access to financial resources, blocking their employment, reproductive control, which is like getting someone pregnant against their will, um, social isolation. So coercive control is kind of like the extreme end of manipulation, where instead of making you decide things based on your emotions, but it's really making you like putting you in survival mode and controlling your behavior and actions based on that, right? Making you so scared for your life that you do whatever they want. So with most manipulation, there is that element of choice. So the person thinks that they're making a choice based on other things, but like their beliefs or their values or whatever, but it may just be emotion. So with that definition of manipulation, I'm hearing that a lot in these relationships with people with especially borderline personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, all different types of mental illness, because it could feel so emotionally evocative, right? Like being in a relationship with someone with any kind of emotion dysregulation or personality pathology is like there's a lot of emotions there. There's a lot of fear, anger, and guilt. And with these high conflict relationships, sometimes you're doing anything to keep the peace, right? Anything to make them happy, anything to walk on eggshells and make them calm down, or, get them off your back or something, right? So there's a lot of like emotionally charged decision making. And so you might look back and say, I think I just said yes to giving them that money because I just I just felt like I had to, or like I didn't want to, but I feel like I just said yes to calm them down, right? Or I was just afraid of what they do if I didn't. And so that's what feels manipulative. But an important thing is to know what kinds of manipulation tactics there are out there. And so I'm going to list out a couple of different strategies or tactics for manipulation so you could spot them better. One is reality distortion, also called gaslighting. This is the one you probably know, or probably hear about more these days. But that is intentionally undermining someone else's reality or memory um, in order to gain power over them, right? Usually it's talked about in a romantic context. It's making the other person feel like they can't trust their own judgment or perception or memory. And so they have to rely on you, the manipulator, the gaslighter, for what to do, for like a sign of, truth, or, a guiding post, right? So it's like, it's really affecting the way you trust in yourself. So that's one form of manipulation, is gaslighting. And I have, I talked about that in a whole episode, so I won't delve into that too much. But another strategy is dominance, also monitoring and isolation. So in there's one category of manipulation tactics that is all about controlling the other person, getting power over the other person, being like their manager, and like really keeping watch over all their movements and behaviors. Usually that's blocking them from everyone else, right? Like cutting them off, cutting you off from your friends, or, other sources of support, family. I see that happen usually when it is really sneaky, right? It's really manipulative, where someone would say, hey, they don't like, your family doesn't like me, but I think they're all crazy, and I think that they're really not good for you. right? So you sow the seeds of doubt in the person's mind, the victim's mind, until they maybe pull away from their own sources of support. So that's like isolation. But there's other ones that are like all about surveillance and monitoring. Even the ones I see commonly, and unfortunately I see this in both men and women, is tracking phones, looking at phones, asking someone, where have you been? Telling them where they can go, where they cannot go. And the funny thing is that even as I'm saying it, it's more clear. You recognize it better if it's someone who's like, authoritative, right? They go, you need to only hang out with, you never can hang out with the opposite sex, right? That's like, it's obvious domination. But people can be dominant from a vulnerable place, right? So they could say, it makes me insecure. It makes me jealous when you hang out with the opposite sex. So if you want to show me that you love me and make me feel calm, right? I want to know I want to know where you are at all times, and I want to see your phone at all times. Right. So that is actually a form of manipulation, because it's using the person's love and wanting to care for you as, against them in order to like limit their autonomy. So that is dominance and monitoring. So another one, another manipulation tactic is humiliation or emotional verbal abuse, degradation. That is really attacking the self-esteem, right? That's saying, oh God, you're so crazy, or you're so dumb. Why um, making the person feel incompetent, or even yelling or threats, right? So this is really attacking the person's self-esteem to weaken them, so they might take certain actions, right? Um, this one is this one I found really interesting in family dynamics, because there are family dynamics. I mean, maybe I'm just thinking more from the cross-cultural standpoint, where Americans and, let's say, Chinese or East Asian cultures, they might see, I think, humiliation differently or criticism differently. Um, there might be other cultures like, like Chinese, that are more critical, right? That it's like more okay to say, hey, you look fat, or why didn't you get a better grade? Or, that person is doing better than you, right? In certain cultures, that's actually like a positive thing, but it's still using a feeling of shame to motivate them to do something, right? And for, Western cultures, like me being born here, that feels totally manipulative, because I want autonomy, right? First of all, I don't want to be shamed, right? Like it feels like, don't try to make me do something out of humiliation, but I want to be treated as an individual with who can make her own choices, right? Not that I like this, but if someone asks me, hey, do you want to work out more? Do you want you want to what do you think about, working on your diet or something, versus like, wow, you look fat. Both will hurt. Both are criticisms and trying to motivate me to like get on the treadmill, so to speak. But in one case, I feel like they're treating me like I have autonomy and I could choose, and they're leveling with me as a person. Whereas in, the Chinese culture, that feels to me more like you're just bypassing that part of me, and you're just making me make a decision based on trying to not feel so ashamed or not feel so afraid. So, but humiliation, especially in romantic relationships, can look all sorts of ways. It could look like, just like teasing, like, oh, I'm just kidding, making jokes about you being dumb, or, whatever, incompetent, not a good cook, or not a good mom, or whatever. And being like, oh, just kidding. Um, or it could be just outright like insults. Right. So that is one form of, I guess, like just general abuse, manipulation. But um another form of manipulation, which I just talked about, is guilt, right? But There's this really cool research, or not really cool, but just kind of depressing research in the parenting world where parental psychological control can look like using guilt tripping or love withdrawal or conditional approval to get their kids to do something. So this category is actually working on someone's attachment insecurity, right? It's exploiting their attachment insecurity. It's exploiting how your kid or even a partner will do anything to stay close to you, stay safe with you, and get your love and attention approval, right? That's just like a biological, natural thing that we do. But if you use that against that person, that desire to like want to be close to you by making them feel guilty. Oh, you never call me. It's so terrible. Like, I guess you don't love your mother, right? That's playing on the attachment insecurity. But the love withdrawal and the conditional approval, right? Only being affectionate if they do things that you want them to do, or approving them as a person only if they make certain choices, right? So if they choose to go to this school versus that school, um, the manipulation part is I'm going to make the school that I want look more attractive by giving them the silent treatment if they talk about the other one. Or whenever they lose a competition, I'm going to not approve of them and not even regard them as with the same kind of love and affection as I normally do, to inspire them to work harder out of just like fear of losing you. I also think that I'm seeing this a lot. I mean, I know this whenever we think of like withdrawing love as a parental psychological control, but I'm seeing now adult kids are doing this a lot to their parents, with the rise in estrangement. There are a lot of kids who feel out of control of their relationship to their parents, right? That's just a natural feeling. Like you grew up, you trusted these people, and maybe you felt hurt, abused, neglected, whatever. You're unhappy with the way they parented. So I'm seeing that some kids are using that as a manipulation tactic. It's like, if you don't give me money, or if you don't buy me an apartment, or if you don't buy me a car, or if you don't give me the credit card, I'll never speak to you again. Or you'll never hear from me again. I'm out. I'm never, I hate you, right? So kids of all ages are using that love withdrawal to manipulate their parents. So don't do that. And the last kind of, there are a couple categories, but there are like way more serious versions that kind of veer into the coercive control, which is like economic or resource control or threats. Now, this is really like, hey, I'm going to make you feel something and make you do something based on that feeling by making you feel unsafe, totally unstable in your own autonomy or sense of safety. So that's what you imagine, like not giving someone money, just stopping them from working, or threatening them. If you do this, then I don't know, I'm gonna smack you, I'm gonna hurt the kids, I'm gonna take the kids away, something like that. So this is like trying to get someone to do something by making them afraid that if they don't do it, something terrible is going to happen. And when you get into those levels of coercive control, it really tips the scales to that person having all the power, because our decision making, if you think about it, if you think about like, what are you going to buy for lunch today? If you feel safe and secure and like survival is not difficult, then you feel more free to make decisions, and you can make decisions based on like, oh, you know what, I want to try the sushi place, or I want to, I'm going to make decisions based on my values or my interests at the moment. But if you make someone terrified, right, like they're and like put them in survival mode, they're going to make the one decision it takes to survive, right? If like there's no other restaurant, right, you're going to, I'm like, look at this, look at McDonald's is the only place, and you're going to go eat there because otherwise you'll die in this weird hypothetical situation that I'm making up, right? So coercive control and actually making people feel fundamentally unsafe. Not unsafe in the Instagram way that we're talking about it, which is like more like discomfort, but unsafe, like I'm gonna die. I'm scared for my kid's life. I'm scared for my life. I'm scared that I won't be able to afford housing. I won't be able to pay for the bills for food or anything like that. If you're getting at their like fundamental needs to survive, then you're really controlling someone against their will, right? They can only make that one decision to survive. If you're putting someone at gunpoint, their decision-making process is all going to be what's going to help me live. So that person doesn't feel like they have freedom of choice, right? So you're robbing them of their agency and autonomy if you put them under um, coercive control. It's funny that I keep saying you, like I'm addressing you, like don't do this, but also you're the victim. So I apologize if it gets confusing, but you know what I'm talking about. So those are just some of the main those are some of the main strategies for manipulation that I was reading about. Reality distortion, also called gaslighting, dominating someone or putting them under surveillance or monitoring, humiliation or verbal abuse, degradation, um, guilt, working on their, I guess, attachment insecurity, guilt, withdrawal of love and approval, and the other levels of like making them feel unsafe by threatening their physical safety or economic stability or resources. So those are the different kinds of manipulation that I've been reading about. Now I'm thinking about it in terms of what does manipulation look like in relationships with people with personality disorders. So when I first started thinking about this topic, and I was like, let me think of examples of times that I've felt manipulated. Sure, I've manipulated people too. But it's interesting because it's like, does the manipulator have to do this intentionally? Like, is it like a like twiddle your thumbs evil, like I'm gonna make someone do something bad, like the Othello example? Or can you manipulate someone unintentionally? Like you inspire someone to take an action based on their emotions, but you didn't mean to do that? I don't know, that's a question. So when I was thinking about manipulation, I was trying to think of examples. The first thing that popped up was one of my ex-boyfriends who I think had some sort of antisocial traits. He would lie a lot. He would make up stories that were so nuts that I'm like, why would you make that up? It doesn't, like, we could easily find that out and it doesn't even make sense. Like, he said that he got hit on by Paris Hilton, that he bought a bunch of planes and they were hanging out in a hangar in China until he was ready to use it. Like, just things that I was like, what is going on? So there was like, talk about reality distortion. I mean, I just, um, even when he was saying stuff like that, I do not know if the intention was, I'm going to make Kibby or the people that I'm saying this to feel weaker or make them doubt their reality. I believe he was doing it to um, just kind of make an image of himself. So what's weird about that is that people who tend to lie and deceive like that, they might be making other people do things. They might influence other people's decisions, but it's really more about them and feeling um, like a defense against shame. So I don't know. But what I remember is the most manipulative, like really obviously manipulative move was, oh, this is such a terrible story. I'm like, I feel weird about telling it, but here I am. We were in Central Park and we were just playing around and we are running on these rocks. There's these beautiful cliffs and rocks in Central Park, and we were on a tall one and like a really, really high rock. And I was looking over, I was like, whoa, it's so scary. And I don't know how this came up, but he said basically like, I want you to go down on me. I want you to give me a blowjob. Otherwise, I'm going to jump off this cliff and I'm going to hurt myself, essentially. And at first I was like, what? No. And then laughing. But then he said, no, really, if you don't do that right now, I'm going to jump. And it like it was a situation where clearly he would have gotten hurt. So I like he said it over and over seriously until I started crying, and I was about to do it, to be honest. Like that's the part that makes me feel really weird to talk about. I like almost started and then he like pushed me away. He was like, "No, I wouldn't do that. Come on." Um and I was like distraught for the rest of the day. I don't even know what I was. I think I was embarrassed. I think I was sad. I think I was so scared. I was angry, right? But I was just furious that I was just like sobbing. I remember sobbing all that day. And then actually, now that I'm talking about it, something else that he did was later on that night, I think I was trying to break up with him or saying like that was so messed up what you did. Like I feel horrible. And he was like, it was a joke. I didn't mean to. Ugh, God, now I feel bad for making you feel that bad. Why would I do that? Oh, I feel so bad about myself. And then he told me that he was so mad at himself for doing that that he shoved his heel into a picture frame and sliced his heel open. And I remember a couple days later, he showed me his heel and there was a scar there. And he was like, see, this is what I did. This is what I did to show you how sorry I am that I did that. And I remember thinking at the time, how is it possible that you sliced up your foot and a couple days later it's a scar? So it was just like a lie on top of, I don't even know. It was so crazy. But when we talk about me, I was reading about manipulation, and that's the story that popped up in my mind as the most obvious example in my life. But he was using my vulnerability basically of not wanting him to get hurt. Um, and probably other intimidation too. He was a guy, he was bigger than me, so I was probably scared. But I didn't want him to get hurt. So using that fear to get me to, basically do a sexual act that I didn't want to. And then I guess later on making like guilt tripping me and saying like, look, I hurt myself because I made you feel bad. So then I basically stopped being so upset at him, so mad at him. But that is just using all my emotions to lead me to a decision that I normally wouldn't have with my rational mind if I had the freedom of choice or was using other things besides that fear to make a decision, right? We were in Central Park. I wouldn't have done that in public. So that's a sad example of manipulation. But what I do hear is with, I guess, less insidious in situations, less like obviously hurtful tactics, where, for example, a lot of kids with borderline personality disorder will be like, how could you, I need to live in your house. How could you kick me out? I'm so, things are so hard for me. I'm going to hurt myself, right? So like some of these parents of people with BPD feel manipulated into saying, yes, okay, you could stay here. Yes, okay, you could have the credit card. Yes, okay, I will do this for you. Yes, okay, right? Like, uh, they feel like they're moved by the fear of something bad happening to their child or their love for their child or other loved one, and make decisions based on that they regret otherwise or feel like it's not in line with their values or what they actually would want outside of that feeling. So, and when I talk to those people, they go like, I think my kid's manipulative, or I think my husband's manipulated me into giving them that money. Sometimes I feel that too with my ex, where like he lived in my house and didn't work. I've talked about this, and whenever I would ask about work or whether he's gonna support, he would be like, "Oh, things have been so hard for me. I'm so ashamed, blah blah blah." And then I would feel so guilty that I would drop it. And now I feel like I was manipulated because it played on an emotion I had, to do something that was against my will, or different decision than I normally would have. So is someone are these loved ones with mental illness or personality disorders, are they manipulative? Now, I'm going to argue no. Which sounds weird, except for my ex-boyfriend who tried to say he's going to jump off a cliff if I didn't give him head. But um, the research does not show that people with borderline personality disorder, or even narcissistic personality disorder, but more BPD, that people with BPD are not manipulative. I know, right? That's so crazy. So no, surprisingly, borderline personality disorder in the literature is not connected to manipulation. There is more evidence that there's, of course, a lot of ups and downs in relationships, a lot of attachment insecurity, a lot of interpersonal violence, back and forth, right? So there is a lot of like emotional issues. However, if you really think about it, like manipulation is like the way we're thinking about it in the most evil sense. Is like, I'm going to make you do something that's only good for me and bad for you. And if we take this as like an intentional tactic, right? I'm intentionally doing this. People with borderline personality disorder, at least in my experience, don't say that that's what they're doing, right? They don't say, I'm going to make them feel bad for me so that I'm going to threaten to hurt myself, so I'm going to make them do something, right? They don't say that. What is more likely is that people with BPD have a really hard time asking for what they need, asserting themselves, um, basically getting their needs met in relationships in healthy ways, in direct ways. There's a couple pieces of the manipulation um, definition that comes into play here. So, if manipulation is affecting someone else's emotions to get them to make a decision, well, if you think about it, someone with borderline personality disorder, that's how they're making decisions most of the time, right? In the disorder, their emotions are so dominant that sometimes they take over and take over what they see, how they think, what they decide. So they're making emotional decisions all the time, which is called motion mind in DBT, but they're like feeling and then they're acting. And they might not be aware of what their needs are, but they're just like kind of operating on emotions, right? And it kind of does make sense that if they say, this is how I make decisions. Uh, I make decisions based on emotion, then it makes sense that the way they would get their needs met is through emotion expression and also getting someone else to feel something, right? So it's almost like they're using the language of emotion because that's what they know. That's what they know actually determines their decision making. So with people with BPD or trauma, their sense of agency is compromised. They don't feel like they have their own power to make decisions. They don't feel like they can make rational decisions. They're often in survival mode. Their emotions take over their mind. They don't feel like they're in control. And some people with BPD don't even feel like they have a sense of self, right? They like with identity diffusion and they don't know who they are. They don't know why they're making their decisions. They're kind of like blowing in the wind. Their sense of like, oh, I make decisions based on my rational thoughts and autonomy, and I feel like in control of my choices, and so do you. They might not have that idea, right? They might not know what that feels like. In fact, in DBT, we have to teach people with borderline personality disorder um, how to locate their rational mind, how to locate their emotions and make a decision based on the combination of the two, right? Not just from emotions or whatever, but how to actually feel like they have agency to make their own decisions. So I imagine that if they don't feel like they have agency in themselves, it's really hard to, I guess, appeal to that side in other people, right? So we actually have to teach people with BP to um, tune into what they need and actually ask for it. ask for it explicitly, not try to do guilt tripping or make someone angry in order to, or make someone scared. So they, they like don't threaten them. So they stay with you, but actually say, hey, I really need you in this relationship and I need this. Right. So I think that when people feel like their loved ones with BPD are manipulative, what's really happening is that these people with BPD don't have as much of a sense of their own agency and rational decision making outside of their emotions. So if that's how they communicate and influence someone else and feel influenced into making decisions, that's going to feel manipulative, right? But they don't mean to be manipulative. That's just how they get their needs met. Now, narcissists might be a little bit different. Narcissistic personality disorder, yes, there is evidence that there's exploitation, coercive control, and psychological aggression. Those are the three different types of manipulation that's really found in narcissistic personality disorder. And if you think that the larger than life grandiose narcissists are the ones who are abusers, no, it's actually, the research shows that vulnerable narcissists have worse cases of intimate partner violence and manipulation. So vulnerable narcissists tend to hurt people in relationships more. Not what I expected, but that is, I think the piece about narcissistic personality disorder is power. It's a disorder of power. It's a disorder of uh, thinking that you are not worthy or lovable unless you are the most powerful and the most special and above other people, right? So it's a very conditional way of seeing self-worth. Now, if that's the case, right, if you believe that I'm only worthy if I have power over everyone, well, what do you think is going to happen in relationships? They're going to do all sorts of things to keep power. They're going to manipulate the other person to feel scared to leave. They're going to belittle them, make them feel less than. And they are going to maybe like scare them and bully them into compliance, maybe monitor what they do. Right. So it's all about getting power for people with narcissistic personality disorder. So they will use their position of power and exploit another person's vulnerability, right? To like exploit them or to control them. So there is a lot more manipulation in narcissistic personality disorder, but the main goal is for them to get power. So if you are So if you're in a relationship with someone with borderline personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder or any kind of difficult, toxic relationship, here are some strategies for how to stop being manipulated. List them out first. 1, make it explicit. 2, strengthen your own rational, autonomous decision making. And 3, take space and get a reality check so you can further do that, make decisions based on more sound principles than just emotion. Okay, so I'll break that down. The first strategy I would suggest for stop being manipulated is to really be aware that you're being manipulated. So there's all this cool research on priming. Like if you're looking to there's a cool study where if people are in a movie theater, they would flash an image of a Coca-Cola in the trailers, and it would happen so quickly that people wouldn't be conscious of it. But they saw sales of Coca-Cola in that theater go up when they did that, right? So it's manipulative, right? It's like, like bypassing your rational decision making and getting to a feeling to make you buy more Coca-Cola. However, in that research, they demonstrated that if you were aware that Coca-Cola would flash, even if it was still so quick you couldn't really see it, but if they were told, hey, listen, when you go into that theater, they're going to flash a picture of Coca-Cola to make you try to buy it. If that happens, they're much less likely to go buy the Coca-Cola. So in the priming research, and I guess it applies to marketing and all different kinds of persuasion tactics. But if you are aware that the tactic is happening, you're able to then control it with your rational mind, and you're able to like combat the effects of being manipulated into a decision. So if someone is manipulating you, you could just see and look at their behavior. And sometimes you might have to look at your behavior over time and say, okay, every time they do this, every time they threaten to hurt themselves, I feel scared, terrified, and then I give them money or I say yes to things, right? So you could kind of see, like, tracking your own emotional behaviors and saying, oh, every time I feel guilty or every time I feel scared or angry, I do this. And seeing the pattern. So uh, I've my husband and I call it seeing the matrix code, is when you actually see when someone is doing their tactics to get you to do something, right? So see the matrix code in order to kind of dispel the effects of manipulation. Okay, so the second one is strengthen your own decision-making process. Balance, and I don't mean just making a decision based on rationality, because actual decision making takes both emotion and your rational thought. So you could think about it this: let's balance the long term and short term effects of that decision. So my favorite tool, a skill for that, is balancing the pros and cons. So when you think of taking a decision, let's say I'm gonna go to the movie theater, or I'm gonna buy Coca-Cola, right? And sit down and think, okay, what are my two different decisions, or my several different decisions? Buying Coca-Cola, not buying Coca-Cola, sitting there with no drink. So laying out your decisions and then writing the pros and cons for each, which I know sounds funny, because if I'm going to say pro to buying Coca-Cola, you would think that just goes into the con. But sometimes it just highlights different things when you do pros and cons of each decision. And sometimes even just weighing that out, like writing out why you would take a decision, the benefits of it and the costs, sometimes that would just reveal certain things that are important to you, like not buying drinking Coca-Cola would be in line with my long-term goals of being healthy, versus like in the moment, oh my God, I'm in a movie theater and it's so exciting and I want to drink something sugary, right? So that feels sometimes more like I'm making an autonomous choice because I'm making it based on what I find is important in the long term, right? So trying that pros and cons thing. But also it's really, I found really helpful when it comes to people who are in abusive relationships or even narcissistically abusive relationships, to take space, right? The isolation is going to go against that, but taking space, talking to other people, taking a break sometimes is really helpful. Sometimes when in situations like when I've felt kind of trapped in something, I've taken space from it, um, like a vacation, like a 1 week away. And that helps not make all the feelings so urgent, so you don't feel like you're making decisions based on that emotion or fear or whatever. But you could step back and say, wow, let me look at the whole situation. And what would I decide otherwise? Right? What do I choose? What's the right decision here? Therapy or talking to other people are also helpful, because you're bringing in other perspectives than that one person that might be manipulating you, right? That one person is going to make you feel like, oh my God, whitewashing a fence is so fun. But then when you talk to other people, they'll be like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. So you could start to balance and be like, oh, that person is making one option way more appealing. So that is a manipulation in a nutshell. Talked about how manipulation is a tactic, whether conscious or not. I guess we're thinking more about it consciously, but it is influencing someone's emotions in order to make them make a decision, and making one decision seem more or less pleasurable or attractive. So it's really the kind of naughty thing about it. The bad thing about it is that it doesn't feel like the person's making a decision based on their rational thoughts or their, autonomy. They don't feel like they have control and agency over the decision. They feel like they're pulled into it by their emotions. So, um, you could see if someone's being manipulative, whether, if it's being intentional, then that's not great. But if it's not intentional, you could think about it this way. They're trying to get their needs met in the way they know how. It might be unhealthy and might undermine you. But if they're not doing it on purpose, then it's okay to feel resentful. It's okay to feel bad, but you don't have to blame them for trying to do something with ill intentions. You say they were trying to do their best and trying to get their needs met. It's unhealthy, but let's find a way to um, make decisions and trying to influence each other with agency, right? Like by asking each other directly what you need, by telling people what you want, and letting that other person make their own choices. Right? So, um, I hope you enjoyed this. I always love hearing your comments on YouTube or Spotify. So when you write them, I'll try my best to write back. But if you have any questions or any suggestions for future topics, I love hearing from all of you. And again, if you feel like you're in a manipulative relationship with someone with mental illness like BPD or NPD, check out Kulamind, KULAMIND, and you could book a call with me and we could talk about it. So see you next week. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the host of this podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information purposes only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial, informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of any medical or any professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The host does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Thank you.